What is up, ladies and gentlemen of the internet? My name is Jade, and this is the Here Is What We Know podcast, episode 10, the most provisionally approved podcast on the internet. I'm joined today by my good friend Simon Anderson. Simon, how are you going?
Good afternoon, Jade and Hannah. Lovely to be here as always. Good to see you both well, and we've got plenty to talk about today, something close to our hearts. So I am ready to get stuck in when you are.
Did you know that we were the most provisionally approved show on the internet?
Professionally approved?
Provisionally approved.
Oh, right. I think we have the most emergency authorization out of any podcast.
On the internet.
Yeah.
Hannah, how are you going?
I'm fabulous, thanks. Things are really good, and I think it's been an interesting couple of days. So I'd really love to know Simon's thoughts and your thoughts, and get into it.
A lot of announcements, major announcements that actually considerably transform the social services sector here in New Zealand. There are lots to talk about. Apparently we're getting a new ministry. Apparently we're getting some new accessibility legislation. Apparently we're getting a accessibility governance board, which has never featured in New Zealand ever. Those are the top line exciting things that we're going to be talking about today. But also we have a special guest this evening, Warren Forster. The accessibility legislation, there's a lot to work through in your mind about what does the announcement actually mean in terms of that. Warren Forster actually helped write one of the reports that informed the design of the accessibility legislation. So we are absolutely thrilled to have him feature on the show this afternoon. But before that, like every show we do, it's the question of the day. Simon, Hannah, are you ready?
Oh, yeah.
So, the question of the day today is, what is a man? What is a man? Now, Simon, do you want a minute to percolate on this one? Or should I hand over to Hannah, or are you good to go?
No, I'm good to go. I'm good to go. Yeah. What is a man? A great question, as always. There's literal and metaphorical, or tangible and intangible is probably a better way to describe it in terms of what a man is. Tangible characteristics of a man is quite obvious because you can see it in the way that they carry themselves. A man, in its essence, is somebody who is quite strong-willed and self-sufficient, or has a great drive to achieve on their own accord. And a man is somebody who in ancient times was there as the first lines of defense for a village. And even though the battle lines aren't as clear as anymore, I still think that role is quite important in society. I think a man is somebody who has time to think about themselves, their family, and then the greater group, the tribe, the country, the world, and to factor in the success and growth of all of those groups and their actions. And I think a man is somebody who is I mean, I don't want to get too patronizing in terms of being the protector, but it's just such a key role. It's kept us alive and thriving to the point where we are now. Like the amount of people and races that wouldn't have existed today had it not been for the strong men to keep them going forward. I just think it's very easy to point out what a man is not, I think, rather than to highlight what a man is. But I think everybody has like a deep down kind of subconscious understanding of when somebody says to them to be a man, or now that's a real man. You can either quite easily see and agree, or disagree.
Thanks so much, Simon. And if I'm honest, I'm really interested to hear a woman's view on this question. Hannah.
I was going to let you go first because I often go before you. But,
you sure?
Yeah.
I can go. I think a man, the way I would describe a man is responsibility. I think a real man is a person that takes responsibility, who takes ownership, who accepts liability. They are a protector. I don't think it's patronizing to call that out. I'm very happy to say that. And Simon, the reason why this question came now is I was on the clubhouse and they were discussing whether disability affected your masculinity. And to my surprise, most of the gentlemen on the call said yeah, it did. And I was one of two people that said, I have no idea what you're talking about. Because whether you are rich or poor, you are a man. Whether you have a job or not, you are a man. Whether you could defeat Conor McGregor or not, you are a man. You need to believe in of yourself that you are a man. That is your sole purpose in life, to find a way to convince yourself that you are a man. And I don't know, like the entire call was just like, didn't necessarily agree, and there was a lot of stunned silence because they were hoping that I'd fall into the tropes of, yeah, disability demasculates me or whatever. I simply don't agree. Yep.
Yeah, well, it's one of those things where it's just like, I choose not to let that affect me. You know, like it has the roots in the victim mindset and finding an outside force to assign any of the negativity in your life to. I mean, yeah, regardless of your access needs, if you are a man and you feel masculine, like, absolutely. It's totally in how you carry yourself and how you approach the world.
So my thoughts are, I learned something the other day, who Conor McGregor is, and it made total sense from, one, I completely disagreed with it when I heard the topic, but actually any given person who doesn't have access needs probably wouldn't be able to go up against Conor McGregor anyway and protect others. So it doesn't make any difference really if you've got access needs. It's who you are. It's what you do for others. It's the individual you are and how you hold yourself and uphold your values. I think really shows the true meaning of you as a man.
I think we've alluded to this on past streams as well, Simon. Though I think the role of the man has been dismantled and warped a little bit. Like, believe it or not, as I pose this question, I actually do believe in equality, but I think people have got messed up about what equality really means, because I think there is huge value in the role that women play in society.
Absolutely.
Let me be like beyond clear about that. This isn't about me wanting to pump up men necessarily. This is This is me just saying, men have a role, women have a role. Back in the good old days, you know, the roles were clear and the job was done and society moved forward.
And from my point of view, I think women have lost the perspective of what the role of a man is.
Yeah.
Truly, so it has definitely warped things, and truly recognizing when you do have a man in your life and there is a true individual in your life who's willing to be that man in your life. Now, that doesn't need to be about a relationship at all. It's about being that genuine man in your life to do the role and to be the man, instead of just letting that woman, you just making your own choices and overruling and overstepping and not recognizing and respecting the individual.
I think that's a good place to leave it for now. If you've got any feedback, if you agree, disagree, want to add a different thought, and you're joining us live here tonight, please feel free to jump in the chat. We are live on Twitch and DLive. I must remember to check the DLive chat, actually, Simon.
I've got Twitch in front of me. I don't have DLive, though.
Cool. So you keep an eye on Twitch, I'll keep an eye on DLive. But for now, I think we just move straight into the next part of the show, which will be to discuss the disability support system transformation. Simon, why don't we start with a few of the reactions? You were on the live last Friday. How did it make you feel? What were your immediate takeaways?
Well, as somebody who's spent a lot of time talking with you and about what the work you've done to try and influence the new transformed disability sector, I had some idea of what the guiding North Star is, what EGL was going for, and I guess you know, an idea of hopefully what was coming my way. So I was a little bit prepared for the announcement. Wasn't exactly how I imagined it was going to be, and it wasn't just the announcement of the ministry. It's the other announcements around that, or recommendations around that were really interesting, and I think are pretty cool. And that side of things, I think I don't have a full concept of every area that could affect, but I mean, it's largely positive. The thing I noticed from monitoring like the Facebook chat and getting stuck into it is that for just the vast majority of the people who are watching, it's a level of discussion that just means almost nothing to them. Sorry, like you know, people were just talking about, so is there going to be more funding this year than last year? And then half the people were upset that they were referring to people as disabled people rather than people with disabilities, when you know, it's quite clear why we use disabled people in New Zealand as a term, and why that's what most people are comfortable with. So it's yeah, like, just from my point of view, and to kind of summarize my initial reaction to it, was that yeah, I think it's good progress. I think it's more progress than we've had in gosh knows how many years, but it's obviously just not filtering through properly to the common man. The comms just aren't there, I don't think, and maybe it's just a symptom of how wishy-washy the actual detail is. We'll soon see, but you know, in terms of the information that they've been putting out, it's just, yeah, it's not created the reaction I thought it would, which means they've not given the announcement I was expecting, or they haven't communicated it properly so that people actually understand what's coming, because it should be pretty impressive.
One thing I picked up on, and this is coming from someone close to the work, as you know, Simon, we're just getting a little bit of feedback on your end, actually.
Yeah, apologies. I am just plugging in my headset as I can hear it beeping in my ears.
Okay, no worries. Yeah, one of the things I picked up on and was reflecting on after Friday was perhaps there's more to do in the promotion of EGL. I don't know if
The
you
promotion of what, sorry?
promotion of EGL, and I think that might be what's causing some of the disconnect for some of the people that we found on the chat the other day. Maybe they don't entirely understand the work that's going on underneath.
No, I would say maybe like 1 in 5 disabled people or allies might know what EGL is all about.
Yeah.
I was gonna say, to follow on from what you were saying, there's actually a roadshow on EGL. Now that was 5 years ago, and probably about 30 people from each town from the 11 towns that they went to actually went to it. So one, that was 5 years ago. What's happened now to those individuals, and how was the conversation maintained and continued? And only 30 people from each town. Was half those people could have been working in the sector. So I think it's completely right, Jade. I think it's about, one, we definitely need to reinvigorate and actually educate people about EGL and get people excited again. And because I noticed, one, I thought, yay, great, that was my initial reaction, but I actually said to Jade, okay, so time for you to go to work now. It's only just beginning. And I was thinking, we're not really getting the message. The message isn't really getting across. And maybe some people who did get a little bit angry from some of the simple things that were happening, they're just not following along or not trying to get their point across to the community, because I noticed that the minister kept on saying, the EGL approach. Now, one, I'm not dismissing the EGL approach.
I did see that in the chat, actually, Simon. There were a bunch of people, I remember this, there were a bunch of people saying, what is EGL? That was a bit of a worry, eh?
So, she mentioned it so many times, and it hadn't been actually explained what EGL is. And I know personally from where I sit with my work that the EGL website hasn't had comms and was not provided comms to put up prior to educate people and get people excited.
Yeah, so a bit to do in terms of the communication of EGL, definitely, but I think if I was to say anything, my original reaction is, I'm a little bit closer to the process, so I had a little bit of insight here. I think people should really be excited for the fact they're going to have a dedicated ministry, which will have its own chief executive. Awesome Autistic, thank you for joining the chat.
Hey!
CCS did a roadshow this year about EGL in Wellington, the Hutt and Porirua. Actually, that's a good point.
Yeah, I wasn't too sure of the situation of that. Did it actually happen? So, because no one from NEGL was on there.
With the lockdown and stuff, I know what you say. Also, Autistic, the computer is telling me you're a first-time chatter, so welcome to the show. We are stoked to have you here. Yeah, I forgot about those roadshows, Simon. You remember those, right, CCS?
Yeah. I mean, I don't think I went to them, but I saw them advertised. I don't know. Well, CCS don't really operate up here where I am. I know, like, people. through my own work, we do try and talk about it a little bit, but there is just not a very good coverage in terms of understanding and knowledge on those principles.
So I just wanted to come to the 4 priorities. I'll refer you back to our Discord, Simon. Of those 4, which will you say will have the most impact in the shortest amount of time? Well, what is your most interesting? I think what I'm asking you is which of the 4 is your most interesting of the announcements?
Yeah, it depends which one comes first. Yeah, I mean, we've got like a proposed date of when it should be stood up, which is July next year. So it seems like the ministry itself is going to be put on the skates to get set up, like 6 months. Like, let's be honest, how much work is going to go into it before Christmas?
Maybe a lot.
Well, yeah, maybe, depends. But I mean, we're sitting here last day of October, and my faith in government hasn't shown for them to move at lightning quick speeds in the past. So, we'll see. But that seems to, I mean, the ministry is the one that I have the best sort of understanding around. The legislation, like the accessibility legislation, is super promising. We've talked about what has been in place in the States for some time, and the fact that you can shut a business down if they don't meet standards, you can hand out fines, like that kind of stuff would just, I mean, I'm sure we could go a little bit further and instead of just be so punitive, but there's got to be ways that we can structure some super cool accessibility legislation that just makes the world we live in more accessible for everyone. Like when I shared the live stream on my personal Facebook page, I said, you either know somebody or are going to be disabled at some point in your life, so you might as well understand what it's going to look like. So,
I saw that. I was stoked for your post there, Simon. Can I thank you for that?
Yeah, of course.
Yeah, no.
I mean, I just thought that's probably going to be the most simplest way for people, if they ever read it, to get it into their heads that they should care about it. You either are disabled, know somebody, or you're going to end up disabled. It's the fact of life.
Awesome Autistic in the chat says they didn't talk about how the funding side works though. So you're absolutely right, Awesome Autistic, to pick up on the fact that no announcements have been made about how the funding will transform. However, as part of the 4 key announcements that the government made, let me go back to my notes here so I can say exactly what they said. They have agreed to implement the Enabling Good Lives approach to disability support services on a national scale, and that will coincide with the standing up of the Ministry for Disabled People. Call me biased in terms of EGL, but I think disabled people across the country should be really excited for the framework for input and leadership that Enabling Good Lives is going to provide. A lot of people, and I'm not really sure why this is, but a lot of people think about Enabling Good Lives as a funding line. It's much, much more than that. And if you wanted a bit of detail, because it's not really the goal of this show to talk about Enabling Good Lives, we could do that one day. But I'd encourage you to go to enablingoodlives.co.nz. You might even find a press release from yours truly in the news and events section. Awesome Autistic says, however, will people get DSS who don't get it at present? I love EGL, but it currently excludes me and other autistics. I think Simon and I were going to comment a little bit on the recommendations of the cabinet paper today. We're not experts by any means, and you should get your own advice about what we say on the show. It's not meant as formal advice. But I think I read in the paper, Simon, sorry about my robot, it's a bit more frequent than I wanted it.
No
I think the settings say that the current people on DSS will be eligible for funding under the new ministry, and the current people that have they will stay with the NASC for the time being. That's what I saw in the paper. And those that have personal budgets, I'm assuming, can I just say that out loud? I'm assuming the people in Manawhakaha and the Waikato will keep the flexibility in their budgets as they move to the new ministry. Is that your reading, Simon? This is not
just looking,
this is not advice.
Yeah, I'm looking. I mean, I went from the announcement, the recommendation. And it says that they've agreed to the phased approach or phased rollout of the enabling good life system, and so they've given the appendix of it, which is Appendix 5. So I've kind of just gone deep into that. Yeah, and it talks about, you know, a new person-directed commissioning and funding approach to enable the move to personalized funding and support services. I mean, that sounds like personalized budgets and you know that design the funding you need for the life you want to live, not the stuff you can't do by yourself. You know, which is the deficit model we live in now.
Yeah.
So can I answer that question?
You can input, but it's not advice, by the way.
Yeah, no, it's different. It's different. No, so I'm answering which am I most excited about out of the four.
Oh, yeah.
So for me, it would definitely be the rollout of EGL system transformation. I'm going to disclose to you too, autistic. Love to know what yours would be. I'm not actually eligible for EGL because I have epilepsy and that's not covered.
Well, you also live in Auckland, and Auckland hasn't...
With the rollout, the whole of New Zealand will get it though, and that's what I'm talking about. So, and what I'm trying to say is, I think it's one of those wait and see things. For those who aren't covered under DSS currently, it's going to be a wait and see, and I think more things will be added, and it will be interesting to see, because I know autism's a funny one when it comes to DSS, but it's the extra things that I really like about what EGL has been able to do for the current demonstration sites, building community development and capacity and leadership. Love the principles, love the approach. And then I guess my next thing would be definitely an accessibility legislation. I'm really excited about that. So.
And I won't say too much about it because we have Warren's interview coming up, but there are some key features in there that I'd be really excited about. Simon, just while you've got the appendix up, can you speak to it a little bit? Because I'm not sure that I've been able to see the final version that was agreed.
The phased roadmap.
Please, if you could speak to the top line, so I'm not asking you to read out the whole thing.
Establish, implement, and refine a partnership approach grounded in Te Tiriti o Waitangi to ensure that community voice is embedded in the design, planning, and implementation of all activities in the plan. I mean, I was just actually looking at this other appendix, which is the evaluation of the current EGL programs to inform the rollout, which I think has some pretty good comments and easy to kind of digest. But it says, based on the evaluation, the Ministry of Health has identified a number of critical features for transforming the system nationally, and I think this is really cool. So they're talking about the point of entry and that the ability to connect with a wide range of cross-government services and engage with the system successfully. Now, the role of connectors, or somebody within the community who is able to be the person to go in between the services and to to ensure people know exactly what's out there, rather than just being told what's best for them. Early intervention, which is an EGR principle straight up, begin early.
Yep.
Personal budgets, the same thing. So yeah, they say here the ability to easily assess personal budgets and align with good life plans, pooled funding from cross governments to allow flexibility, capability of the system to support people so that they are equipped to manage their budgets. So that kind of stuff there is pretty uplifting, if they can commit to putting that into place.
Yeah, amazing.
They talk about the management structure, disabled people in whānau leadership, which is, nothing about us without us, another EGL concept, robust safeguarding arrangements. Some people, it says, disabled people want to experience the dignity of risk, to face and manage the same level of risk as other people. They want to recognize, identify, and report neglect or abuse, be able to effectively safeguard themselves. I mean, gosh, I can't imagine how many people are in New Zealand at the moment whose level of risk is deciding whether they want to go outside and play on the playground or stay inside and watch TV. Like, that's their level of risk assessment, rather than, actually, I'd rather use my funding to try and start up a business, and if I fail, then fuck it. That sort of exposing people to the everyday risk of life is super important, I think, in terms of another EGL principle of mana enhancing.
Not to put you on the spot, Simon, but I think the people at home would be like kind of interested in this as well. Could you ever imagine being limited from your choices day to day?
I mean, I've had the only experience I can draw on from part of like my life experiences through like severe physical injury. I've destroyed this arm, it broke, so I was I've lost access with the limb, and I've blew out my knee, which meant I could barely walk, and couldn't walk without crutches for a few weeks. So I've had my independence and physical ability diminished temporarily. That's kind of given me an insight as to like, oh man, these are the sort of things you take for granted that some people rely on hours of support from another human being to complete those activities. So like, I can really try to imagine, but I just know it wouldn't come close to the real human experience, and I just resigned to know that I'll never fully understand it. So it's just important to keep that in mind when working in the space, to not overrule or overwrite somebody with true experience.
Awesome Autistic says, I hear that non-disabled organizations are working out how to set up disability arms of their current organizations. for example, Taikura Trust. I have heard interesting.
The same thing. Yeah, I've heard the same thing.
What have you heard, Simon? Let me in.
Oh, well, I mean, that organization that I've mentioned, I've heard conversations that, they're looking into, well, I know like they're trying to look into other things within disability, but they are just trying to diversify their income to stay alive, to exist and provide some benefit, like selling equipment or whatever. I'm assuming places like Taikura Trust and other NASCs will be trying to transition into service provision rather than, not provision. Well, is that the right word for, to become a service provider? They're going to provide service rather than provision it, actually.
Yeah. I mean, there was the merger between Imagine Better and Accessibility as well. That was huge news for anyone close to the sector. Actually, the cabinet paper refers to service commissioning
and Life Unlimited.
Oh, sorry, what did I say?
You said Imagine Better and Accessibility.
Oh yeah, and Life Unlimited. Of course.
And Life Unlimited, so it's like 5 NAS.
Yeah, and Awesome Autistic is absolutely right. The cabinet paper does refer to a new service commissioning model, which will be really exciting, and I think is going to actually provide for a market shaping like we've never seen here in New Zealand. I think disabled people and whānau should be very excited.
Because one thing I was going to say is, one thing that piqued my interest, but I haven't been able to read through the cabinet paper, so you guys may be able to tell me differently. The minister alluded to that the ministry for disabled people,
or whatever it's going to be.
Whatever it's going to be. She alluded to that it's going to be a lot easier for people to navigate the disability system.
Centralised supports. Yeah.
But it's about just not knowing what kind of support you can access and can't access, and I think that's been a big thing, in part, from my understanding, why some families decide to just disengage and not continue trying to get support, or have support, and then that's going to be a struggle. And then I think it's because of the social commissioning models, it's going to be interesting to see what kind of opportunities that will open up to.
Yeah, I hope I'm not speaking out of turn, but I think the appendices do speak for the need for dedicated approaches for Pasifika and Māori, Simon? Is that there?
Well, I mean, at the very start, it talks about approach centered in Te Reo Waitangi, so that's the Māori space covered already. But I would assume, I didn't see a specific Pasifika mentioned, but that was just through a light skimming. But I would assume, either they've broadened it to minorities, or at least ethnic minorities.
The BIM Lounge with the 100 biddies.
Oh, wow.
BIM Lounge, thanks so much for being in the chat. I've been hanging out with BIM Lounge a little bit in my spare time. BIM Lounge is a new streamer here on Twitch. He likes to develop games.
Oh, the guy that you told me about. Hi, BIM Lounge. Lovely to see you.
So he's someone I've been spending time with, because I have an interest in development, and I've been thinking about gamification and how that could add value to some of my work. So I'm always working is the upshot of that sentence. But thank you, BIM Lounge, so much for the 100 biddies. Really appreciate it.
Even when you're having fun, you're thinking, how can I be making the most of this? Yeah.
He is now #1 on the
Since we didn't get a chance to do it last week.
Oh man, thanks so much for that, man. That's so awesome.
Happy birthday, late present.
That is major, Simon. Thank you. Simon just gifted a sub to BIM Lounge.
Aww.
I was almost like wiping my eyes, making sure I was reading the correct information. But guys, I'm gonna put a pause right here, because we do have a special guest this evening on the show, as promised on Facebook. We have an interview with Warren Forster. Warren is a barrister and researcher who helped inform the accessibility legislation proposal. I want to allow people time to hear from Warren. Simon and I are going to be in the chat. This is the first time we've done a pre-recorded interview, so we'll still be here. We'll be in the chat, and then we'll come back a bit later and give some final thoughts. Is that okay by you, Simon, or you want to say something?
Yeah, happy,
first?
yeah. No, I mean, congrats to the newest subscriber. Welcome,
BIM Lounge.
Yeah,
awesome.
No, I'm really keen to get into this interview.
All right.
I've heard good things.
So, a little preface on this. If I seem nervous, I really was. So piss off. And with that, we'll head on over to the interview. It's a great one. A lot of really valuable information from a really super intelligent man. So, ladies and gentlemen, enjoy the interview, and we'll be back right after this. We are so excited to have with us this afternoon our researcher and barrister, Warren Forster. Warren, thank you so much for joining us here this afternoon.
Kia ora ihoa, thank you for having me.
Warren, off the back of last Friday's announcement, you must be absolutely ecstatic. Tell us how you're feeling about the announcements on Friday.
Well, thanks, Jade. If you imagine there's a vision for the future, which is that we can remove disabling experiences, those negative experiences our people have every day across the motu, the people who face barriers, they can't get the support they need. It's great that the government has recognised that and said, here's the direction of travel, we're going to do something about it. So that part of it is fantastic. But like everything, if you spend your life experiencing something or your life researching something and how to actually remove these disabling experiences, these negative things that people face, this is what you want. You want something that's the best in the world, that's going to work for now and for generations. And we don't have that yet. We got something down here, but it's better than where we are now. But we want to raise that to here, and we want to keep it going up. And that's really the challenge now for disabled people, for researchers, for our leaders to think, is this enough? Is this actually going to work to change the people's experiences? And if it's not, then we need to keep pushing. And that's really, that's how I feel. So I've worked on something for a long time. It's come to fruition. It's great to launch a research report and then a month later have the government say, hey team, we're going to turn this into legislation. That's pretty much unheard of in our space. And the reason that that's worked so well is because we've had the disabled community, we've had government, we've had policymakers, we've had everyone talking for 3 or 4 years about what it is we're trying to do. And it's great that we can do that, but we're not there yet. And with the legislation that they're proposing, I don't think we're going to get there quickly.
So quite separately from this legislation announcement was your report. And in your report, you had, and this wasn't just your report, I want to be very clear, you worked as part of a team on this. Tell us a bit about what recommendations you made independently of this legislation.
Look, thanks, Jade. And just to acknowledge Tom and Curtis, who spent so long working on this. This work was done with the support of the Law Foundation, otherwise it wouldn't be a thing. And what we did in the report is we set out a whole lot of ideas that we think are the sort of essential ideas. And when you come time to draft legislation, they're the key things you need to define. So we have a chapter that does that. Then we talk about what we really need, which is a regulator. And the regulator's job, like if you imagine we've got walls already of buildings, we've got different standards that talk about this, different standards that talk about that, but those walls have no foundation, they've got no roof. There's no coordination that brings that building together and makes it work. And we say we need a regulator that sits across everything, and that's their job. So that's the first thing, is that regulator. Now the government hasn't announced a regulator. They haven't announced that coordinating body. They say some chief executive of a government department should do that. And my response is, well, we've had chief executives of government departments for a long time. We don't need a new law and a chief executive to make this a thing. So that's the first critical point that we said that they haven't come on board with yet. The second thing is standards, and they have come on board with standards. And we say that we can have non-enforceable standards, which is everything we start working on collaboratively now, and we start figuring out what works, we start innovating, we set the direction, and as we need to, they become enforceable. So they then become someone's job to make them a thing. So we got a regulator, we got standards, and then we have what we're calling a notifications process. And that is how everyone with that lived experience says, here's this disabling experience I have. It's not, no one can argue with me about my experience. It's true, this is my thing. And then it's the regulator's job to say, how is this experience created by barriers, and how can we remove it by removing those barriers? So that notifications process, where all of us who experience these disabling experiences across New Zealand can come together and actually work collaboratively to remove these. That's that system of notification and identification of barriers. Then we have this feeds back into the standards development process. And the final bit, which we don't think we're going to have to use very much, is enforcement. And that is when someone actually says, hey, here's this barrier that exists. Here's an enforceable standard that is meant to remove this barrier, and you're not doing it. You aren't actually removing the barrier. Please do that. And like you can imagine, that might sound like a big scary thing with someone coming along with a stick and saying, like, we're going to whack you until you take that barrier away. But that's not really the reality. As we learn about what we can do together to remove barriers, I think we're going to see most people doing it. But what they need is a bit of law that says, hey team, here's what we need to do. And that's why we need an enforceable standard as an end state of this process. And we think that by telling everyone, look, eventually you're going to have to do this, so let's get started now, sends a really strong signal to people to collaborate and actually work together to remove those barriers. So, and then you've got to process how you sort out disputes. If someone says there's a barrier here and you need to remove it, someone else says no, there's not, or I don't need to remove it, we need a way to sort that out. So we talk about that as well. But they're the key bits of making the legislative model work.
So are you telling me the accessibility governance structure that was announced on Friday, that's not actually part of this then? It's something different?
Well, what they're saying is that we can do all these things that the research project concluded we needed to do with an accessibility governance board. And I just don't think that's going to work. If you put the onus on a group of people to do all this, to get it, to do all the research, to get all the data together, like we're just going to have people on a board that are nominated by a minister, and we're not going to have the infrastructure we need to design a system and make that system work. So I don't think that a governance board is actually going to cut the mustard. It's one way. This is what they have in Canada in the provincial system, but there's no way for people to actually connect.
Yep.
And I don't think it's the right thing to create a burden on 10 disabled people on a governance board to say, hey guys, it's your job to go and connect to everyone to tell us what we need to do. It's just, I don't think that's a thing. I have no problem with a governance board, and I have no problem with the innovative co-governance model that we're working to develop. Great ideas. But unless you've got a, like, the health and safety system has WorkSafe. They got hundreds of employees. Mm-hmm. Their job is to do this. Mm-hmm. If you just had a governance board for WorkSafe or health and safety, that's kind of what you had for ages, and it didn't work. So you've got to have an infrastructure. It has to be a whole lot of people's jobs, hopefully disabled people, to actually do the mahi and then tell what the governance board or the minister or whatever it is, what needs to happen. And there's, in my view, anything short of that is less likely to work. And that's what we keep coming back to is, how do we design a system that actually is going to work and is actually going to remove these barriers? That's the core thinking behind what we do. And then how can we structure this so that it centers disabled people and their lived experience in this whole process? So if you had to say to the disabled people, you identify the barriers, you go to the governance board, you convince the governance board to deal with your barriers, and then what happens then? The governance board goes to a ministry chief executive and says, hey, chief executive of MSD, can you ask nicely for these barriers to be removed? We can do all of that now, and it won't work. It hasn't worked.
I see what you're saying, Warren. I've never had it laid out this way for me before, so thank you. Thank you for framing it up that way, particularly for our viewers who may not be so connected to the disability sector or policy in general. Lots of people that watch us wouldn't be near that stuff. One question I want to put to you as a disabled person is, why are we comfortable with non-enforceable standards at first? Isn't it really time to kick the can down the road, so to speak, and get things going?
So, undoubtedly, yes. But what we see internationally, and I'm going to take Canada as an example, they have accessibility systems in each province. They spend 2 years making each standard. So over 10 or 15 years, they got 5 standards, tick, got those standards in place. I just don't think that's a thing. Now, what I want to do is I want to say, hey team, let's all collaborate and say, here's like 40 different areas that we want to do a non-enforceable standard in. Let's get cracking on 40 different things. As we identify these barriers, let's start work. Let's say, here's the way we're going. And what's going to happen is we're not going to spend 10 years fighting about what technical words go into something and guessing what actually is going to be the case. What I'm saying is, let's get everyone together, identify these barriers, and let's start innovating about what works. And as we find out what works, we can then turn that into an enforceable standard. And like, so the best example is the web stuff, web standards. There's a new web standard.
Yep.
There's been a whole lot of them developed. If you take a web standard and you develop it into a enforceable standard, by the time you make it an enforceable standard, it's already outdated. And this we see happening over and over again. And we don't get any standards until everyone agrees on what they should be, and everyone says, I don't know if that should be a thing. Instead, what we're saying is, let's get everyone focused in the right direction. Let's start with a whole lot of non-enforceable standards. Some we can make enforceable tomorrow. We can like really easily say 70% of new builds need to be accessible houses. We can make that a law, away we go. We don't need anything to tell us what that is, except this has to be a thing. But having an accessible house or stock of accessible houses doesn't actually mean people get into and can live in these houses, because there's other barriers, transportation barriers, work barriers. Like, can I afford actually to buy a house or to rent a house? So we've got to think like outside the box. And what we see, if we come back to these removing disabling experiences idea, what we see internationally is a small set of enforceable standards over a 10 or 15 year period doesn't actually cut the mustard. And that's why I'm saying we need a data system to tell us what's working. We need to be able to innovate. And as we innovate and can show, we can work with businesses that want to be proactive and actually start designing, delivering accessible systems. As we move along this journey, we're going to learn. People are going to be confident, yeah, it can be done. And that's going to, in my view, allow for more change more quickly, and us to figure out what does work and doesn't work and turn these into enforceable standards at the time that we either need them to, or they're mature enough that they then become enforceable. So that's how we looked at this as researchers, and it sort of came back to this question of what's more likely to be effective. How do we center disabled people in their experience? How do we learn from this and actually then deliver change?
Amazing. Thank you, Warren. So I'm really keen to ask you, how does New Zealand compare currently with somewhere like the United States that has the Americans with Disabilities Act?
Okay. I'm not an expert on the American with Disabilities Act.
Oh, was that not part of your... I don't want to take you to a place where you haven't been, Warren.
No. But what I'd say is some things work really well in America for disabled people and some things don't. And certainly what there isn't is there's not a system for providing social support. There's not a system for providing income support. There's not a... Like, their systems don't exist the way that we can create them here. But some things, like, yeah, there can be accessible ATMs. Fantastic, that works. There's a whole lot of other things that on an individual basis work, but there's no point having an ATM if you have no income and you can't do something about it. There's no point having an ATM if you can't get to the place to use your ATM. There's no point having an ATM if you can't work and so on. And like, to be honest, I don't know when the last time you used an ATM was, but I don't use ATMs very often. I do it all online. And again, like not trying to sort of, you know, be too controversial here. Great idea. had an important place in the world, started some important work, but I don't think it's a thing that's actually going to work here in Aotearoa. And from that perspective, I don't think we need an American with Disabilities Act. I don't think we need a Canadian federal legislation model. I don't think we need a model based on any of the provincial systems, because they don't centre that lived experience. Like, you've got a governance board, you've got a group of people, they tell the minister, hey, here's the things that we think you need to do something about. You do your 5 standards, tick. No one then comes back and says, does this actually reduce all these negative disabling experiences? Do we have an accessible society as a result of them? That's just stuff that, like, yep, tick, done the law, great. Now what? And that's the stuff which I think we need to really avoid replicating here in Aotearoa. And as we create these new systems, new barriers will emerge. And along that line, we have to have a way to say, hey, look, here's this barrier that's coming through. People are telling us that this is creating a negative experience for them. Here's what we can do about it. And the interface between the accessibility and the disability support system needs to be really carefully thought about. If we're not going to provide income support or retraining and help people get into jobs, how do we actually address this stuff? There's something like 150,000 disabled people here in Aotearoa who want to work. But that's a massive policy failure that we don't do anything about that. Like, we've got a skills shortage. We've got a shortage of people to actually do work here. Imagine the impact on the economy, on people's experiences, if our system was designed to actually help people get into jobs that are meaningful, that they want to do. Like, and I tell you what, if you socialize that cost, if you say we're all going to provide income support for these people the same way we do with the ACC system, everyone will really quickly work out how to help people get into jobs, because it will save money. but again, you go back to this housing system. Having an accessible house doesn't mean people can live in it. And until you start integrating and joining these dots up, how is it we're actually going to create substantive change? And that's really the question that drives me. And that's what we've got to look at as a society. What are we going to do? Is this going to work for our people, or is this going to work easily within a government structure? Now, the government's really good at making things that work within a government structure. They do that all day. It works well for them. But what we've got to come back to is this actually going to create the change that people need to start removing these negative disabling experiences? And if the answer is yes, great. But what we want to see is, we want to see people think about what the government is saying. We'd like them to compare it with the work that we've done and make up their own minds about what they think is going to work for them. Because ultimately, disabled people need to make these decisions about what they want and communicate that to decision makers in government. And that really is what we're trying to do, is to say, hey, look, here's a way that we think is going to work. Tell us if you want this. And ultimately, that's a decision not for me, but for everyone out there with that lived experience to decide what's going to work for them.
So for people at home that are still getting to grips with what's been announced, Warren, and if I'm honest, it sounded like you were a little bit disappointed about the announcements at the front of the interview this afternoon. What would your message be to disabled people out there about what the next steps for them should be? How should they get involved?
So, everyone out there who's listening, who's interested in this is the once in a generation opportunity to design a system that we can then use for the next 20 or 30 years to bring about change. I challenge you to engage with the government's ideas, to engage with other ideas, and think about what's going to work best for you. What are you most confident will bring about change for you now, and for your children and your children's children, for your friends, for society? We're all connected here in Aotearoa, and we get to decide what laws we want. And we're at the point now where we can say to our government and to our MPs, yeah, that's a good law, much better than where we were, but here's where we want to be. And if that's how you feel, you need to articulate that and share that thoughts with the decision makers. Because otherwise what's going to happen is over the next 12 to 18 months, we're going to see governments making decisions that work for governments, not work for people. And that's not, in my view, the best way forward. So think about not just what's going to happen now, but in the future. How do you want to engage with the system? Do you want a group of people that the government appoints on the governance board to figure out everything for you and tell you how to fix it? Or do you want a process that centralizes you and your experience and aggregates this up and actually generates data about what these experiences are so that someone can then design them away? Do you want the chief executive of a ministry of social development or somewhere, or do you want to work safe? Do you want a group of people whose job it actually is to do it? And these are the questions that you need to decide. And once you've made those decisions, you need to communicate them. And I'd encourage you to talk to anyone else who's interested in this space, share your ideas, and let's work together to make the best possible law that we can that gives us confidence that this is going to work for us in the future to actually remove these barriers.
I did have one more question on this, and then I'd like to take a few more minutes of your time to just comment on the Ministry for Disabled People. Coming to the component of your recommendations around reporting, and I've spoken to you about this offline in the past, Warren, tell us what your framework provides in the way of preventing Karen reports. We're really free with our language on this podcast, so we can actually refer to it as that, but I'm always worried about the Karen test. So how will your reporting structure avoid some of that?
Well, I have a few friends called Karen. Some of them might actually watch this, so just need to be a bit careful.
Shout out to all Karens out there, by the way.
Shout out to the Karens. Love your work. Look, at the end of the day, what we see internationally is every 3 years there's a review done. They do it everywhere that there's a system in place. And the reviews generally come back and say, hey, you don't centralize the lived experience of people. Hey, how can you get all disabled people more involved in this stuff? You know, hey, how can you collect data and gather data on things? So the best example is that in Canada, when they started the system, they made everyone with more than, I think, 20 employees or 20 people involved do a self-report every year about how well they're doing in meeting these new accessibility standards, which is great. Like somewhere in some archive in Canada, there must be like millions of reports generated by people about how great they're doing. And that's pretty much what the focus of the resource was. Now that doesn't work. No one's actually got these dumb PDF documents and scanned them and analyzed them and seen what's happening over and over across the board. A whole lot of consultants have made a lot of money making good spin out of this, I'm sure. But ultimately, that's not what it's about. So what I want to try and do with this is centralize that lived experience, which is why the data system that sits behind the notifications process is critical. If millions of notifications are coming in each year saying, hey, this is like a terrible thing and I'm having these terrible experiences, and we're putting these standards in place and nothing's happening, we're failing. We're absolutely failing. But if we're saying, hey, there's these millions of disabling experiences that come in the first 2 years about transportation or work or whatever that thing might be, and we can learn from them, and we can develop standards innovatively and quickly and say, hey, this is actually, is this working? Yes, the data's telling us it's working. We're getting all these notifications telling us how awesome it is. Great, let's learn from that. And let's then work in a new area. So having a data-driven system and a reporting system that's inbuilt will actually allow us to front-end that experience of people and back-end that experience of people, which will tell us if it's working. And this is why I think it needs to be outside of government, because like we've all seen the list of issues that goes off to the UN. It's where the UN asks some questions of the government and says, hey, tell us what you're doing with all these things. The government's response is, yeah, we're doing great. But actually, if you scratch below the surface, we're not. And we have this repeated time and time again. And having these kind of bright, shiny reports with glossy pictures on the cover of smiling disabled people is really good for the models that actually get to do that. But for everyone else, it sort of gives us veneer of legitimacy to a broken system. And that's what we see time and time again. And the only way to overcome that, in my view, is with evidence. So if you have a data system...
Yeah, just to challenge you on that, I'm mindful of the shadow reporting process. So does the shadow reporting process help to sort of keep things on a truthful level, shall we say?
It does. That's the whole point, is that the question is, how are we doing? The government says, oh, we're doing great. And then you've got to do all this work on shadow reporting to come up and hopefully bubble above the surface to show everyone it's not working. But in these kind of reporting processes and the reviewing processes that happen, often the government, if it's controlled by a government agency, often the noises that are coming out is it's great. And that's why I'm saying that evidence, data, people's lived experience feeding into this can tell us if it's working or if it's not. And this is kind of the critical thing, is that, you know, should a group of people have to go and do all this work on shadow reporting to the UN every 4 years to bring about change in an accessibility system? Or should we design a system that does that every day, every month, every year?
Thank you.
And actually sort of measures in real time what's happening? And we can design that system now.
Yeah. Awesome, Warren. I'm mindful of time. We're actually a little bit over time, but I've only just learned that some of the research you have done may have informed the Ministry for Disabled People. So just wondering if you can speak to us about work you've done in that area.
Look, thanks, Jade. And I've got a report that's going to be coming out sometime soon, based on some research I did, that talks about how do you design a universal, integrated, person-directed system to provide income support, social support, financial support, rehabilitation, healthcare in a single model. Because that's the ACC idea. Mm-hmm. Now, what we've done with the Ministry of Disabled People is we've taken support services, you know, funding for support out of health, and we put it there. And that's great, great start, fantastic work. We now have an infrastructure, we've got a ministry that we can start adding all this other stuff into. But if we just leave it as providing social support model through, you know, enabling good lives, which is great, we do that nationwide, which is great. But until we integrate that with income support so that people can actually afford to live the best life that they can, until we integrate it with healthcare so that people can actually get the services and treatment they need, until we integrate it with training and actually pathways into work, you know, we can't have a ministry for disabled people that only does part of it. It won't work in the long run. It's not going to include mental health, doesn't include accident. All the discriminatory effects of the existing system cannot be overcome until we integrate. And we can't integrate until we as a country have a discussion about how we're going to organize it, how we're going to fund it, how we're going to make it sustainable in the long run, how are we actually going to realize these visions. And we can't realize a vision for a society without these disabling experiences until we're really serious about having a ministry or some other organization to actually do that. And so it's really good. It's a starting point. It gives us a framework to bolt on the rest of what we need for an integrated system. But the messages I'm getting from the government are, we're not up for that yet. So it's a good step, but in the long run, it's not actually going to remove the discrimination that people experience based on cause of disability.
Warren, I'm hearing that there's a long way yet to go.
Yes, but we're starting.
Yeah.
And I don't want to leave people on a negative note. We're starting this. There's a future. There's a direction of travel. And if we all work together, we can actually start bringing about change. But these structural decisions about how you organize the structures that will deliver this, those decisions need to be made now. And if we can't get everything we need now, we need to have a plan on how we get from where we are now over the next 5 to 8 years to where we need to be. And that's the critical thing. Excellent. What we do now has to allow that evolution and transformation, not just of enabling good lives, but of all the other bits people need to live the best life they can without these negative disabling experiences.
Excellent, Warren. It's been so great to have you on the show. Just a couple more questions for you. How can people reach out to you? How can they get involved with any of the research that you're doing?
Look, great question, Jade. I don't practice as a barrister anymore in terms of helping individuals. So mainly now I do research, and I run a dispute resolution system called Talk Meet Resolve. So I'm pretty hard to get hold of as an individual. But what I will say is that as this research starts getting out there, what I'd encourage you to do is to read it, to share it, to talk about it. You know, and again, we're trying to help create a framework that will make a difference for everyone. And you guys get to decide, is do you like it or do you not like it? And you know, I want this bit of what Warren is saying, I want this bit of what someone else is saying, I want this bit of this accessibility system that's designed, and I want this bit of what the government's saying. And together, these things, I think, will work for me. They're the conversations that people need to have with each other, with government, with MPs, because ultimately we're going to have a limited window. If we don't start doing this conversation and trying to shape this up in the next 12 months, then the foundation's going to be, you know, built, and it might be too late to really get this real long-term change in place.
Yeah. Warren, we've had 30 minutes of your time, and honestly, I feel like we've only just scratched the surface of this ginormous topic of accessibility in New Zealand. If you wouldn't mind, there is something we do on this show. We always have a question of the week, and would you be so kind to play along with the people at home and maybe answer it for us?
I'll try.
So the question of the week this week, Warren, is what is a man?
Wow. So that's quite an interesting linguistic question. You can take it from a whole lot of different perspectives. Man in the law, we now call person. So in some of the Nordic countries, man is wider than a gendered, you know, male or female. Here in Aotearoa, Tāne have a particular role. To me, yeah, I don't know. I'm a man. I don't know what makes me a man. Perhaps it's, you know, my connection to humankind. Perhaps it's my connection to the past. Perhaps it's my connection to the future. Those things might make me a man. But yeah, I think there's a very simple answer, but I think the simple answer is often wrong. Yeah. So I don't know if that's very helpful for you, but yeah, there's a lot of different things that can make a man.
Warren, you are a great sport playing along with the question of the week. Warren Forster, researcher and barrister, thanks so much for joining the show this afternoon.
Kia ora, Jade and Hannah. Thank you for having me, and I hope that people out there like to engage with these ideas, because we certainly need a lot more of that over the next 6 to 12 months.
Thanks so much, Warren. We'll see you again.
Mā te wā.
Wasn't that amazing?
Warren. He's a fantastic bloke.
Absolutely amazing. Thanks to Awesome Autistic for responding during the interview. Much of what you say we absolutely agree with. I'll just read it out before we move into final thoughts. Awesome Autistic says, Warren touches on work that still needs doing. ACC reforms, income and attitudes, but at least, trust my thing to play up, but at least we're starting somewhere. But I think he's right. We need a plan for the next 5 to 10 years. The announcements have to be just the beginning.
Love it.
Simon, what are your key takeaways from that interview? I'd love to hear from you in particular.
Yeah, there was a few things that really stood out. I mean, through work, I've heard of his name, I've heard of his work, and the company that I'm involved in has worked with him in the past. So I've heard of Warren, but haven't had a chance to meet with him in person or ever hear him speak. And my gosh, he's got a great way at articulating, you know, the area of expertise that he clearly has. And behind that expertise, you can see, I mean, I feel like I'm a pretty good judge of character here, but he seems like a very genuine fellow who, through whatever reason, has got a passion for transforming the way disability is managed in New Zealand. And I do believe he's calls himself an ally of disabled people. So I guess I can quite relate to him on a few different levels as somebody who's got some characteristics and some traits to aspire to. I mean, some of the things he was saying about, like, you know, for the accessibility standards, you know, let's start now. Let's start with just building in some of those unenforceable standards, but just to get just to socialize the precedent, just to socialize the new bar. Like, you don't have to immediately come out and say, hey, these are only going to be, you know, optional for so long at the first thing. You announce them, you socialize them, you talk about them, and then you say, oh, hey, by the way, you know, eventually you're going to have to start meeting these, or you're gonna just not be included in the market. And yeah, I think that's just like a great way to build momentum. You can tell a lot of the things he was talking about is about building momentum, starting early, getting things out of the way up front instead of spending so long planning to then implement everything on one day. It's quite clear that this announcement, in Warren's eyes, gives us the green light to just put things in place and start building on top of it, you know, from day one almost. What else did he talk about? Like,
he was a little bit critical of the governance settings. He was hoping.
I really liked that.
He was hoping for a bit more of a formal, like, oversight structure, and that wasn't set out in the announcements on Friday. Yeah, I just picked up on that.
Yeah, so
I mean, when he said, you know, we'd much prefer something like WorkSafe, yeah, when he... Oh, sorry, is my connection degrading?
A little. I wondered why there was a bit of a gap.
Yeah, because there's a bit of a delay. Yeah, there is a bit of a delay coming in. So I'll just leave it with you, Jade.
I was just going to say what I really like from Warren is, you know, yeah, I could see government and whatnot then getting caught up, and then us seeing 15 years later, and we've, as you said, only got 5 standards
in 15 years or 15 something years, like that.
So start and then figure out what works, what doesn't work,
and enforce them all at once.
And accessibility wise, and he's like, well, enforce 40 all at once then. And I like that idea. I think we're just gonna, and then I think what he was really saying by the governance and how I perceived it, but didn't get a chance to actually ask him is, should it be a and? I thought it's great having accessibility governance, but should it be a and also actually having a disputes, you know, oversight?
No, I'm totally with Warren about the need for formal oversight. The thing that he sort of touched on but didn't really go into, I don't know if you picked up on this, Simon, how, like, things can get watered down.
Oh, yeah, definitely.
But because of the political appetite, and where he was wanting formal, independent oversight day one, so there was no possibility at all of politicizing accessibility and twisting what is palatable at the time. Sorry, I talked over you.
Sorry, I said, how's my audio? Is there a delay still?
No, you're good. We're hearing you now.
Okay, cool. Yeah, so I'm not sure if it came through but yeah, when he talked about, you know, implementing something like WorkSafe for disability, that clicked like a light bulb straight away. I was like, oh, yeah, that makes so much sense. You know, there needs to be an independent body of some sort that holds it to account, because yeah, like you said, we've had ministers in positions who could enforce or who could ask, very nicely for things to be removed, for barriers to be removed. So he said, there's the avenue for these things to happen now. So why wouldn't it be why would it be any different? So I think I'm with the same camp as you, Jade. Yeah, it needs to be separate. It needs to be independent. It needs to be somebody's job to hold the government to account.
And can I just say, when I say end, what I was actually meaning is, I'm for you completely. I had a full light bulb moment when Warren said what he did. But when I say end, I think having a governance structure within the Ministry for Disability, disabled people then being able to report back to the community and actually have oversight of what's going inside the actual ministry, that they're actually doing the job.
So you're talking about the actual centralized reporting component. I think we can take away, and this is not formal advice, but we can take away from what we've been able to read that because everything is going to be underpinned by enabling good lives, that we can absolutely expect that disabled people in whānau will be in leadership and governance roles in the next phase of change. I'm really excited. But to use a word to use a bunch of words that I've been saying all day, I'm mindful of time, so we might move into final thoughts now, if that's all right with you, Simon. Simon just got a little
Looks like my connection's taken a dive, so maybe if I level out.
Yeah, so we might just head into final thoughts and see if Simon comes back. Hannah, is there anything you want to say to sign off?
I'm just really excited. As Warren said, it's going to be a really important 6 to 12 months initially, and from there overall, I really look forward to hearing and receiving messages from everyone on what change they want. And it's not just about what the government's going to announce. We really need to highlight it now. We need to step up. It's exciting. I just say thank you, Simon, for being you're a great ally, and I look forward to seeing how you can work towards a new future. And when I say new future, it'll be interesting to see how system transformation will affect everybody in the way we move forward. So it's exciting times, and look forward to it. Thank you.
Yeah, and for me, I just want to thank everybody that viewed the show here this evening or later on YouTube and on Odyssey. We really appreciate you coming out and being part of these conversations. Just want to highlight that BIM Lounge and Awesome Autistic both got gifted subs here this evening. So thank you for being a part of the Farrar Familia. Warren did also indicate that he actually DM'd me like a few minutes after the recording to say he would be absolutely over the moon to be able to come back. So I indicated to him that there is no chance we wouldn't have him back. So stay tuned for when that happens as the legislation gets into the detailed work. But Simon, anything you'd like to say to round off?
Yeah, I mean, thank you, Jade, for organising Warren to come on. I knew he would add some value, but it's just quite clear that he's got much more of an in-depth understanding of what the government has announced than we have just for the time being. So, and the way he can explain it, using layman's terms to get the information across. So, even if you just clipped his interview and posted that separately, I think people would probably find that one of the most helpful, if not the most helpful resource to kind of go into what this legislation or what this announcement, is all about. But to my thoughts is quite selfishly, I feel really hopeful because it makes my place in the disability sector much more clearer in my mind, closer to what my ideal role in the sector would be, and creates a better scenario for better outcomes for disabled people, which is the primary thing there. But just if I reflect on how the announcement and the future relates to me, I see it as just a massive positive, and like I'm just so keen to push it forward. Like I work for a service provider currently that is constantly coming up against the guidelines and the rules that are set in place currently, and to have a system where that's not an issue, and the opposite is commonplace, where rules disappear quickly because of issues identified. Like, I mean, that would be a dream. That self-reporting, I could imagine where enough people report into the system saying this specific process that I'm required to go through to access something or to do something isn't working for me, or just needs to be removed and made much more streamlined, then the process for making that happens much faster. You don't get sent between different ministries and everyone gives you it's just the law, it's tough to change, it's just it's the realm we've got to work within. I'm so sick of hearing that shit, and I just cannot wait to hear hear the end of it.
Well, I know I've already gone, but I'll just say to finish off that I'm really excited to see the opportunity that will exist for the Ministry of Disabled People. Draft name, of course. Mm-hmm. It'll be very much about enabling good lives in the initial stages, but my hope is that it encompasses creating a much more universal experience for all New Zealanders, regardless of their ability or background. With that, ladies and gentlemen, I just want to acknowledge Warren Forster for making the time available to be on the show this evening. He is a very busy man at the best of times. I want to acknowledge everybody that's been along in the chat, participated, and added value to this episode. But for now, thank you for being a part of the channel. Thank you for being a part of the journey. Please stay awesome. And Simon,
we'll see you all in the next one. Bow.